Supreme Court case of Chiafalo v. Washington could have tremendous implications, including on the push for a national popular vote. That is to change fundamentally the structure of how we select a president of the United States via an interstate compact. To discuss this and break down what the National Popular Vote Compact is and what the Electoral College is, get a refresh there and more, I am pleased to be joined here today by Trent England, who's author of a fantastic book on this very topic. And Trent joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Jimmy. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming on. So I want to ask you to really set the table for us. Remind us what the Electoral College is, and a big reason why we're talking about it today is because of this Supreme Court case yesterday. We're going to dive into it a little bit more deeply with our law professor guest in the next segment, but go ahead and kind of tee it up for us. Give us the overall synopsis of what was discussed.
Yeah, the Electoral College was created because the American founders first were going to create a parliamentary system. They were going to have Congress elect a president, and then they realized that's not really that great of an idea, right? You wind up with all the politics of Congress spilling over into the executive branch, potential corruption in selecting the president. So they created something kind of like a parliamentary system, but it's actually a two-step democratic process. And the way it worked out is that we all vote in our states and we choose presidential electors, and then those presidential electors go on to vote for president. And so we have a two-step democratic process, and the Constitution just gives the states power to figure out how to represent themselves in that process, but all the states hold elections. So we have a two-step democratic process by which we elect the president of the United States.
Now, fundamentally, Trent England, the reason for this system, I mean, there's a lot of people who are saying now, oh, this is antiquated. We've had presidential elections stolen by Donald Trump and George W. Bush, although Bush was not the first time that we had a president who did not win the so-called popular vote, but did win in the Electoral College. A lot of people who say it's outdated and outmoded, and we should move beyond it and shift over to this national popular vote. Just underscore for us why the framers felt that it was necessary to set up a system of an Electoral College and have each state have electors based on the total number of representatives and senators combined, as opposed to saying, okay, we're just going to take a national total and use that.
Yeah, the Electoral College has actually become more important over time. The reason the American founders created it was that even back then, in 1787, you still had some very big states and very big cities relative to the rest of the country. And James Madison actually says at the Constitutional Convention, kind of getting close to the end, and they're trying to figure this out, he says, look, I like the idea of just doing a popular vote, right? Just taking the raw national popular total and choosing a president that way. It's simple. But the problem is, and Madison put his finger right on this, he said the problem is we've got a few big population centers in this country, and they would control the White House, not in one or two elections, but in every single election. Everybody else would be left out. And, the country has only gotten bigger, I mean, much bigger since then in terms of geography, in terms of population. We're much more diverse. The Electoral College forces our presidential candidates, our national political parties to actually operate nationwide to build big coalitions. You can't win with just a few cities. That's what Hillary Clinton learned, right? Her campaign was a disaster, really, right? She failed to reach out. She failed to win over states that Democrats had won for a generation. And because she basically became a regional candidate, with that region being the big cities, she lost. And the system worked exactly as it was designed to. And it basically says to the Democrats, look, if you want to win the White House, you have to build a broader coalition. You've got to moderate. You've got to reach out to Americans who aren't already like you. And now what we see is some of those folks who lost the last election say, no, we don't want to reach out. We don't want to build a broader coalition. We just want to change the rules.
Once again, we're talking with Trent England, who's executive director of the Save Our States Project and author of Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. The antiquated system argument is very interesting to me because what it presumes is that something fundamentally has changed about population centers in the past versus population centers today. That is to say, that when the Electoral College was set up, as we're talking about, it was to make sure that you have a diffusion of influence on selecting the president. So it's not just major cities that get to make that decision, the whole country has a role. That has not changed. Now, in fact, we've just had an expansion of population where now you have these population centers that can be even more expansive and more influential, leaving out other parts of the state. So, if anything, the Electoral College is probably more needed now than it even was back in 1789.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the rationale of the founders applies today, and the system has actually worked much better than they ever suspected. They thought that oftentimes the Electoral College would deadlock and throw the election to the House of Representatives. That hasn't happened since the 1820s, right? The system actually works very smoothly, and typically the popular vote and the Electoral College results line up because the Electoral College it basically forces the candidates and the parties to operate in a certain way. And when they do that, they wind up, typically the winner of the Electoral College also gets the most popular votes, but they win it distributed around the whole country, which is a good thing for national unity. And I think it's just a tragedy that we see so many people out there who don't understand that. I mean, the New York Times, the Boston Globe are out there today saying, oh, this shows that the Electoral College, we don't need it anymore. As you say, it's an anachronism. It's so far from the truth. If people would just look beneath the surface and understand why these constitutional structures exist and how they really kind of build our national politics. And look, I mean, it's the same reason why in so many other countries around the world, they don't have a direct popular vote for their president or prime minister. They're either a parliamentary system like Canada and Australia and Great Britain, or they have a kind of an electoral college like they do in Germany and in the largest democracy out there, India, right? All these countries, they want some kind of check and balance system that makes sure that regional candidates don't win the top spot. And, our system works great at that.
It is so fundamental to keep that in mind, but also one thing that always I think about, if we had a national popular vote, I'd love for you to describe what the proposal is for this national popular vote compact that has been gaining steam across the country. I know in 2019, my home state of Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, signed on to this compact from the state legislature, although now on the November 2020 ballot, there will be an initiative to repeal that measure. But nevertheless, there's this movement to shift over to a national popular vote via having this compact. And one thing I keep in mind, other than what we've been talking about, is the complexities and the idea of having a national election. I mean, right now, think about 2000. When you had hanging chads as an issue in Florida, you didn't have a big national stop in counting ballots and everything, and a major lawsuit that was encompassing a whole bunch of different states. It was Florida and the campaigns. It was a major lawsuit because it got to the United States Supreme Court, but it was dealing with Florida issues and Florida's electoral delegate count. Imagine it being on a macro scale where all of that gets brought up in a much larger context because you have 50 states that are now suddenly embroiled in a conflict over electoral college delegates as opposed to just Florida or just Michigan or some state that's caught in the crossfire.
That's right. And this whole scheme, which came out of the Al Gore loss in 2000, basically a group of people in California came up with this plan to try to get states to pass laws that say we'll ignore how our own voters vote, and instead we'll give away our votes in the Electoral College based on the national popular vote, right? And this is a way to basically hijack the Electoral College and turn it into a direct election, turn it into exactly what the American founders rejected, and kind of nullify the whole thing without ever changing the Constitution. The problem with, I mean, there are all kinds of problems with that because we don't really have a national popular vote. Every state runs its own elections. And when you start cobbling together all of these state elections and claiming that you can build a national popular vote out of that, I mean, we forget it's not just that we don't have nationwide recounts, that if there's some dispute somewhere, it's controlled. I mean, if you have election fraud, right now, in Chicago, all they can steal is Illinois, right? And if the Democrats are concerned about how they run elections in Texas, well, all they can do in Texas is affect the outcome in Texas. But if you go to a national popular vote system, Chicago can steal the whole country, or Texas, or whatever state or city a person doesn't like, right? I mean, the National Popular Vote Compact says nothing about this. It has no provisions for how you would deal with recounts, how you would deal with election disputes, fraud. They're silent about all of that because they want to pretend like none of those problems exist. I mean, it would walk us into, just as a practical issue, all kinds of litigation, all kinds of election disputes, the potential to not even know who the legitimate president is until after Inauguration Day. And it's a disaster waiting to happen. It's great that Coloradans this November can vote to get the state out of it because it's so dangerous, and it rejects the wisdom of our Constitution, which is what we've used for over 200 years.
Absolutely. Again, Trent England, our guest, executive director of Save Our States, and author of Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. And yesterday, as I'm going to get to in the next segment in greater depth with our next guest, Professor Robert Hardaway, in the Supreme Court case of Chiafalo v. Washington and also related case of Colorado Department of State v. Baca, the court said you can't have faithless electors, that is, electors who go against state law, which says, hey, you must vote based on the popular vote in our state. So Colorado and Washington had electors that said, nope, we're going to vote differently from what the state's people said. Some are saying, well, okay, this maybe makes it more difficult for the national popular vote argument to go through, or maybe it makes it more easy to do it, depending on your perspective. There's a debate about that. How do you think this case could impact the debate over the national popular vote and what might happen moving forward if, say, there were enough states that signed on to this compact to suddenly get it to kick into gear, where those states have their electors chosen based on the national so-called popular vote instead of their individual state's popular vote?
So legally, the case is very different than any case that we would bring to challenge national popular vote because states have two kinds of laws on presidential electors. One kind of law is about how those electors are selected. The other kind of law is about whether those electors are bound to vote a certain way. And the court case was about whether the electors can be bound. The National Popular Vote Compact changes how electors are selected. So the issues are a little bit different, but Justice Elena Kagan, in her opinion yesterday, did multiple times remind us that the whole tradition of the Electoral College, the way it's been understood since almost the very beginning, is that presidential electors go with their state. That states choose presidential electors to represent the people of their state. And it was great to see Justice Kagan over and over again using that language and reminding people the purpose of the Electoral College, right? Whatever nuances there are, whatever little differences there are between the states, the purpose is to have presidential electors representing their state, which really means the people of their state. It raises some real questions about whether the Supreme Court might strike down the National Popular Vote Compact, should it ever take effect, based on that same rationale, that same understanding of American history.
I believe it was Justice Thomas who also made the point in his concurrence that states cannot just enter into interstate compacts without congressional authorization, and that's exactly what this is, a national vote compact.
That's right. That's right. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has never enforced that provision of the Constitution. But I think this this is exactly the kind of interstate compact that, if it's not struck down for other reasons, should at least require the consent of Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one final thing I want to do real quickly before we let you go, Trent England. I really appreciate your time. I'm sure we will have more conversations in the future on this program, but I want to put up pick 3. This is an image, a cartoon a few years ago that was put out by a gentleman on behalf of the Daily Signal, which is Michael Ramirez. And what it does is it shows what the country would look like in an electoral college map if electors were selected based on the national popular vote. And you can see how influential California and Texas and Florida and New York would be versus all of the other states, with just a few that are smatterings of slightly larger influence. But really, you have this massive concentration of voting influence on selecting the president of the United States on these big population centers, leaving whole swaths in the country, flyover country, out in the cold.
No, that's exactly right. If Colorado joins this national popular vote compact, if the voters don't vote it down in November, and the compact ever took effect, Los Angeles County would have twice as much power over Colorado's presidential electors than voters in Colorado would have, right? All of a sudden, California, New York, Florida, Texas, they would have huge power over Colorado's voice in presidential politics, right? I mean, I don't know why anybody thinks that's a good idea.
I don't either, unless they want to have influence in those particular population centers for their own political reasons. That's for sure. Trent England, again, check out his book, Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. And also, Save Our States. What's the website so people can learn more about the importance of this institution?
Yeah, saveourstates.com is the website, or people can find Save Our States on Facebook.
Trent England, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, sir. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jimmy. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, Trent England joining us. Check out the book, Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. Thanks for watching this clip of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel. You do not want to miss our live show. Thanks for your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.